what I'd like to do is just read just from the very beginning. I may skip a few parts, so if you follow, you won't necessarily see it all, but I think of this book mostly as a coming-of-age book. It's a book for a young boy, Richie, who's 17 years old, and he has a very, very short time span. So he's growing up under the most difficult circumstances anyone could grow up, but I think he does it. At least I think that. We'll ask later if you do. But that's how I think of it. So I'm going to read the very beginning, and you can hear his kind of voice in the beginning. He's kind of joking, fooling around, and this introduction shows Richie and the girl that eventually he falls in love with, Sylvie, and their kind of original Halloween prank. And then I'm just going to read a little bit from toward the end. Okay. So this is Richie at the start of the book. You have to picture me as a 17-year-old boy, I'm sorry. That you guys have to use your imaginations. And if you've heard Noah Galvin, now I'm always like, oh, how would Noah say this? But anyway, the beginning. I shit you not. Hey, I'm totally reliable, swear to God. I, Richard Casey, AKA the incredible dying boy, actually do live, temporarily, in the very hospice unit I'm going to tell you about. 3rd floor, Hilltop Hospital in the city of Hudson, the great state of New York. Let me tell you just one thing about this particular hospice. Picture this. Right in front of the elevator that spits people into our little hospice home, there's a harpist. No joke. Right there in our lobby, every damn day, this old lady with white hair and weird long skirts sits by a honking huge harp and strums her heart out, or plucks, whatever. The harp makes all these sappy sweet notes that stick in your throat. How weird is that? I mean, isn't that like a bit premature? We're not dead yet. But it's pretty amusing at times in its own strange way, this whole harp thing. I can sit there in my wheelchair on a good day and watch people get off that elevator. They're here to visit their dying somebody, and they walk right into our little lobby, and that music hits them, and they sort of stumble and wobble. They go pale. They have got to be thinking, just for a second, that they've skipped right over the whole death and funeral mess and gone straight to heaven. Most of them back up at least 3 steps, and some of them actually press the elevator button or claw at its closed doors trying to escape. It's easy to read their minds. They're not the ones dying, right? So why are they here? How did they end up in Harpland? It freaks them right out, and I just have to laugh. The nurses tell me that harp music is soothing and spiritual and good for the patients. Okay, I say fine. Maybe for the 95% of the patients who are ancient, like 60 and above, it's good. But what about for me, or Sylvie? Me and Sylvie, I say, we're kids. We're teenagers, and we're dying too. What about our rights? Okay, that's kind of harsh, I admit, because the nurses really are sort of cool, and they get all teary when I say that, because no one, and I mean no one, wants to think about kids dying. But we are. So I say, deal with it. Everybody dies, dudes and dudettes. That's the name of the game. But that's not what I want to talk about, really. Dying is pretty boring if you get right down to it. It's the living here that's actually interesting, a whole lot more than I ever would have imagined when I first got tossed in here, kicking and cursing. There's some funny stuff that goes on, like what me and Sylvie did night before Halloween right in front of the elevator. It was classic. Okay, so maybe I better explain. My grandma, who isn't as old as you'd think because the women in my family have babies real young by mistake, mostly, once told me that in New Jersey, when she was a kid, there was this amazing night before Halloween thing that they called Cabbage Night. On that night, parents actually sent their kids out to go crazy. Grandma says there was only one Cabbage Night rule in her house: be home by midnight, even on a school night. I mean, you can do a whole lot of very bad and very funny stuff between sunset, let's say around 6, and midnight, right? And Richie goes on and sort of talks about some of the stuff his grandma did, and then I'll just pick it up where he picks up the story about what he and Sylvie do again. I swear, this is all relevant to me and Sylvie's own little cabbage night performance because, as I believe I mentioned, we're kids, hospice hostages or not. Luckily, that was one of the days that Sylvie was feeling strong enough to get up, or she made herself strong enough, because I've been bugging her for 3 days, telling her how funny this whole thing was going to be. Anyway, we waited until 5:30 p.m., October 30th. The harp lady knocks off, unless somebody requests their services, at 5. And 5:30 is when most of the long-faced loved ones show up to visit, and the nurses are real busy with supper trays and whatnot. So here's what we did. We donned our pre-planned, not-so-gay attire in our separate rooms, and then we wheeled ourselves quietly into the little lobby, and we took up the harpy's usual space. We sat in our wheelchairs with like insane death mask makeup on our faces, pale green with big black circles under our eyes and streaks of red dripping from our lips. And we had my collector's item Black Sabbath t-shirts on, and Sylvie, it surprised me that she had the energy, but the girl was really into it. She had made a big red devil fork thing out of an IV pole. She'd actually painted the whole thing with nail polish, a real project, and she was holding on to that. And I put one of my uncle's rave tapes, all screaming distortion, into the CD player on my lap, and we blasted that sucker every time some poor fool stepped off the elevator. And I held up my sign, "Going down, this means you," written in fake flames. Whenever somebody gasped and backed up, me and Sylvie, we cackled and screeched like insane demons. Okay, so it was a childish joke. Funny as all hell, though. But Sylvie, that girl is much tougher than you'd think, given she's about 5 feet nothing and bald. She took it maybe a smidge too far. See, she'd planned something she didn't tell me about, something totally in the cabbage night tradition that she'd come up with on her own and kept quiet about. And she pulled it off without blinking an eye. Here's what Sylvie did. She reached behind her back and pulled out a cigarette lighter and 3 boxes of Kleenex. She was quick as anything. She clicked the lighter and lit those babies up, 1, 2, 3, and threw them down on the floor. No shit, real flames shooting all over the place for about 1 millisecond. Then all hell really did break loose. Nurses, doctors, and custodians, and volunteers, and counselors, and food service dudes, and probably the priests and the rabbis too, they all came running and shouting, and about 9,000 feet stomped out that one little fire. And me and Sylvie, we howled. We laughed our asses off. We nearly fell out of our chairs. We just could not stop, even when everyone started yelling at us and telling us to go back to our rooms and not come out again. Because that was even funnier, them sending us to our rooms like little kids. Some punishment. I mean, what were they going to do? Kill us? Sentence us to death? Okay, I'll stop there. Just going to read a little bit from the end. Many things have happened by this point. There's been all kinds of violent interactions between Sylvie's dad and Richie. Richie has really, I think, at least I believe, fallen in love with Sylvie. And Sylvie's dad doesn't like it a bit. He's a little bit out of control. He's so grief-stricken, he's so enraged about his daughter. He's drinking way too much, he's behaving very badly. But in any case, because of all this stuff that's going on, they've actually brought in lawyers, and they've come to a legal agreement in order to keep peace on this floor where people are dying. Richie's family has to stay on one side of the hall, and Sylvie's family has to stay on another, and they're not allowed to cross the line. And at this point in the novel, Sylvie's unconscious. She's very ill and weak. She hasn't been conscious in a few days. And Richie's gotten this kind of belief in his head that he could be like the prince. He could save her with a kiss. He could wake her up. He thinks this, but he can't go across the hall to her room. He can't see her. Nobody will let him. And at this point, he actually does get out of his room while people aren't looking, and he's rolling in his wheelchair down the hall, and at this point, he's just right near the nurse's station, which is right in the center of the hallway. I'm close enough to the nurse's station to see what happens when my mom and Sylvie's mom converge. They're both going to ask the nurses for something. The families are always up there asking for another blanket, a pitcher of ice water, pain meds, whatever. What I see is a little blurry and tinged with green. Richie's also in very bad shape at this point. So he's having visual and other problems. The two moms are standing on their sides of the big square where the nurses gather, each mother on her side of the hall. But then, like some sort of magnetic force or something gets turned on, they keep going toward each other. Like some kind of planetary pull, gravity times 10. My mom and Sylvie's mom, they forget about whatever they needed and they look at each other. You can see the moment when their eyes lock. It's like watching a ballet. They're like twin dancers, those moms. Mine is tall and blonde, Sylvie's is short and dark. It doesn't matter at all. They each move around the nurse's station, coming up to the far end of the square. Then each one takes 3 steps forward and they meet in the middle. I'm sure it's the exact middle of the hall, where the line is, the dividing line. For a second, each mom stays on her side, and it's like everything on the whole floor freezes. Aides stop carrying trays, nurses look up from their report writing and their hands go still. Visitors are glued to their spots. Everybody watches. There's not a sound except some quiet harp notes drifting in from the lobby. Then my mom and Sylvie's mom reach out their arms and take one more step. And they fall into each other, wrapping each other up in the tightest embrace you ever saw, ever. And there's a sound like you never want to hear ever in your life. Those two moms just start to wail. It splits the air in our hallway, that noise. It rends our air. It is unbearable. And it just won't stop. It's so awful that you think that even somebody up there would cover his ears in shame. In the midst of the paralysis that noise creates, I make my break. Not, it turns out, to Sylvie's room like I planned. I'm not thinking. I'm fleeing. I don't know how it happens, but I'm in the lobby. The harpy has dropped her hands from her harp, hearing that wail. She's half standing, her hand over her mouth. When she sees me, she straightens out, straightens up. She takes command. "Richard," she says, "let's get you out of here." "Please," I say, "take me outside. I want to be outside." She wheels around and pushes my chair out of the sliding glass doors, and once they shut behind me, the noise stops. It's cold out. Now, Richie hasn't been outside in a long time. It's cold out, and the air hurts my nose, my throat, and my chest at first, but I just keep gulping it down. Cold, fresh, painful outdoor air. And it feels good on my skin that's so stretched and dry. The harpy takes my chair across the parking lot to a little verge of frozen grass that sits uphill at the hospital. She sets the brake, turning the chair so I can look way off down the hill toward the river. She takes off the white shawl thing she's been wearing and she wraps it around my shoulders. Then she says, bending to speak directly into my good ear, "Take all the time you need, Richard. I'll wait." Then she backs away and I'm all alone. That's what strikes me as so strange. How long since I've been left alone? No one hovering, no one jumping up into my face. A while, that's for sure. I pull the shawl around me and I let the wind fill my ears. It covers up the buzzing. I look down the hill at the city of Hudson. A bunch of lights strung in a loose rope down to the river. There's a train leaving the station down there, heading south to the city. It sounds its horn long and deep. I close my eyes and I think about all the people on that train. off to the city. Maybe they're planning some Christmas shopping. Maybe they're just going to visit someone. Maybe they're going to work. Doesn't matter. It makes me feel happy thinking of them. Just plain old people living plain old lives. And just beyond the train tracks, the river is doing its own thing, like it's been doing forever. Fish swimming around in the cold water, doing whatever it is fish do when winter is on its way. That's nice. I lean my head back and open my eyes. I'm looking at the sky, hoping for stars, but it's a heavy cloud kind of night, I guess, because there's not a one. Sky's black as can be. Even so, if you look up long enough, stars or not, it almost feels like you're falling into the sky, right? You know, it's like anti-gravity or something. I keep my face pointed up, waiting for that to happen, and I feel something cool and wet touch my cheek. I hope I'm not crying. I mean, I don't feel like I am, but maybe I can't even tell anymore. Maybe I'm always crying. But then there's another cold, wet kiss, then another, then a whole swirl of them. And I get it. It's snowing. First snow of the year. I open my eyes as wide as I can, and I open my mouth too. The little flakes fall faster and faster, and looking up, it's amazing. They're coming toward me. I get that. They are falling. But it feels like I'm lifting, going up toward them, like I'm the one moving. I hold my arms out in front of me, and it's just like flying. I'll stop. That's it. I would love to answer any questions or anything about this book, any book, publishing, writing, anything. Yes.
Was it hard writing in a boy's point of view? Because I know I can't read books for like men from a woman's point of view, but for some reason it was easier to read this book. So was it hard for you to kind of channel a teenage boy?
You know, I would have thought it had been. I have another story in here that's narrated by a 19-year-old boy, so it wasn't completely new to me. But as I said, it's one of those things that writers sometimes say that makes you sound all artsy-fartsy. But I just heard Richie talking. I mean, Richie's voice was very, very clear in my head. And so, no, I had no trouble at all, at least as far as I know, trying to make it sound like a 17-year-old boy. I think I got away with some things, I didn't try to keep up with the absolute, newest slang or, all that, because first of all, that ages a book really quickly.
Yeah.
But I've been teaching college for a million years, and I teach freshmen. So 17 and 18-year-old kids are kind of familiar to me. I raised two boys of my own. And Richie's voice, it's funny now, because now it's faded. I don't hear it as much. But when they did, I don't have the hardcover copy. But on the hardcover copy, there was the flapped copy, the flaps inside, where they, how you pick up a book and you read the flap, trying to see whether you're going to read the book or not. And they kept trying to do the flap copy. Nobody likes the flap copy, so we went back and forth with the editors. And finally, I said, maybe we could just let Richie write it. Can we just do it in Richie's voice? And they were like, oh, cool. And so then they said, we'll try it. And then they wrote back and said, we can't do Richie. I said, that's all right, I can do Richie.
Yeah. I have the voice.
So we did it that way. So yeah, that wasn't that hard for me. But, And also, I often try to do what I make my students do. And to get them into a little bit more freer imagination, I often make them write from the point of view of a character who is of the opposite gender or much different age, to write from the point of view of a much older person or a much younger person, just so that they get out of their own heads a little bit. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
So it seems to have worked. Whether it would ever work again, I don't know.
Did you originally envision it as a young adult novel?
No. Nothing I'd ever written before had been for young adults. And as I said, the story was published, a book of short stories that's definitely for adults. And when I sent it to my agent, I had no idea. And she's a great agent, and I was just very lucky that she read it and she took it. And she said, well, what do you think? This might be a young adult novel. And I was like, well, I don't know. I said, I don't read much young adult stuff. I don't know. And she said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I think it should go to, Algonquin, because they're starting this young adult line. But for fun, let's send it to 5 other publishers who do adult novels, and to a couple who do young adult. And all of the publishers that she had sent it to do adult novels wrote back and said, oh, we really love it, but it's a young adult novel. So I was like, okay, I guess the vote is in.
Yeah, it's unanimous.
They, in order to do a young adult novel, they did change it just a little, very little. What you read there is pretty much the way it was, but in the version I had sent out to the agent, there was a prologue and an epilogue and a middle section, which you call a middle section, that was from Richie's mother's point of view.
I would have loved to read that.
Well, they thought for most teen readers it would be better just to keep it all in the teen voice.
I would have loved to read that, because when I get really into a character like I did, I want to see more. So yeah, I would have loved to read that.
I had worked really, really hard on those parts, but then when they took them out, I said, well, no, I was fine with it, because I could see that. I think it made it a more coherent book.
Yeah.
And actually, of all the characters to write about, I loved writing about the nurses. I loved Edward and those people who became so real to me. And those people, they weren't in the original short story. It was only a short story. It didn't have room for all the nurses and all the other people. And Uncle Phil was only in there a little bit.
Uncle Phil is crazy.
Uncle Phil is crazy, and then the grandma. The hardest character for me to write is any scene in which Richie's mother is present, because that was the character that I couldn't help identifying with.
And so she was more the serious character, right?
Yeah, and I really and that's the one thing Richie won't talk about, and it's clearly the one thing that makes him sadder than almost anything, is he realizes he's causing her so much pain, but he can't help it, but he still is. So that was actually difficult. So writing those sections from her point of view had been really hard, and so I was like, all right, it's okay. They can go. I've been a writer a long time. I know that a writer's best friend is a good editor. You can't see your own stuff that clearly. So. Other stuff?
How do you feel? We were talking about this before. We said, oh, don't say anything.
We're homeschooled. She's homeschooled me, so you just
But
have fun.
there's a program on, I don't know what channel it is, called Red Band Society. How do you feel? It's like they took it inside your head. And
I
they made
haven't
a show.
I haven't seen the
I've seen
show.
it once or twice.
I haven't seen the show. I've heard a few things about it. I don't know. The people that have seen it, have you watched any of the episodes?
I refuse to watch it because it causes
Once she started reading it, I saw 1 or 2 of them. It's the kids, like you.
It's the kids. The person that I know who watches is my nephew, and he said, first of all, they don't look sick enough, anywhere near sick enough.
No, they don't.
He thought it was funny. He thought it was fairly well written. What's been interesting, I guess, for me, if from a marketing point of view, is that now there's websites and various publications that are saying, oh, well, if you like the TV show, The Red Band Society, you should read this book. So I'm like,
whatever.
But I don't know. I don't think they certainly steal my idea. Ideas are out there. You can't copyright an
And it's a
idea.
big topic ever since you did that. John Green made it really famous. So.
Yeah, he really did. He definitely did. Yeah. So I don't know. I think things come and go, and I think I should watch it just to see.
I haven't seen the show either. The thing that always struck me about the novel is that it's about a very depressing subject matter, but it's not a sad book. Like, it doesn't read that way. And like, I think to a certain extent, like John Green's book is like sort of a tearjerker, is to make you feel sad a little bit. And that's not your novel at all. And I think that's actually almost a better story in a way. It was because this kid was trying to struggle with it and was trying to make as much peace with it as he could. And I think that that's realistic, though, even for somebody that young.
Yeah, and I think, and certainly because, you know, lots of kids have blogs and write and, you know, stuff online, so I get to see people's honest opinions all the time. The people who truly love John Green's book, you know, are completely in love with it because of the romance and that it is a tearjerker, that's actually their complaint about this book. It's like, well, this book didn't really make me cry. And I'm like, oh,
It
well.
wasn't really supposed to make me cry. I thought it made me laugh in a lot of
It made me. It's supposed to make you laugh in a lot of places, and you know. But if you want a tearjerker, no, that's not what this book does. I mean, it's sad. Obviously, the situation is really, really sad. But I did. Yeah, I tried really hard, and I think that was true to all those kids I met. You know, they were the least, you know, weepy or sentimental group of kids you ever saw in your life. I mean, I knew a teenager who, you know, took out he had metal pins in his legs, he'd been in a terrible accident, and took out all of his tubes and caught a cab from the hospital from New York City. I mean, could barely move because he heard that, you know, some guy was moving in on his girlfriend. And we're all like, Walter, don't do it, you know, all he has to do is like plink and you're gonna fall over. And he was just like, no, caught a cab, went out there, you know, came back to the hospital and the doctor's like, all right, they put everything back in, you know, that they were supposed to. So it was that kind of spirit that I was trying to capture, you know, that, hey, you know, we're still here right now and we're gonna be who we are. So
I have one last question. How did you come up with that whole figurative and realisticness of how the characters played for days of their loved ones' lives towards the end? That was really figurative. I really
I don't know. That just, I thought, okay, you know, people do play cards a lot in the hospital,
Yeah.
you know, to pass time. And I was like, oh, they're playing poker. What would they bet for? And I was like, well, what's the most important thing here? It's another day of life. So I don't know. That just was one of those things.
It's just natural to you.
Yeah, yeah. And in that was actually in the short story, so that was always there. What I had to do in the novel to make it work more as a novel was I had to put in a few card games earlier. You know, they play gin rummy.
Yeah.
They play a few other things too. But also, you're right. It's also we're not sure by that point in the book if anything that Richie is seeing is really real because he's kind of hallucinating. His vision is off, and he thinks, you know, that Sylvie's father is like a demon, and we, you know, you just
can't really tell because he's losing.
Yeah, he's beginning to lose it. What's been interesting, because as I said, I came out in France for adults. For a lot of adult readers, I mean, you sound like you're a really good reader and really get all the little things that a writer would love to have people get. But it's been interesting because a lot of especially younger kids who read it, really do think of Sylvie's dad as a monster, as this awful, and I'm like, and every adult.
I think he's misunderstood.
Every adult that I has read it understands he is behaving badly and he's way over the top, but they understand why.
Yeah.
He can't save his daughter, and he's a lawyer. He's been used to taking care of everything.
And like it said in the book, the dad is always just not only because he's a lawyer, but the dad is always supposed to take care of the family, and he lost his control over that, and that ripped him apart.
Yeah, I mean, he does awful things. There's no
Yeah,
doubt.
no.
Yeah, and he's drinking way too much. But you know, I hoped that people would at least not sympathize necessarily with him, but understand why somebody could be that way. And Richie does. Richie never blames him for a minute.
Yeah.
He understands perfectly that, you know, because he feels so strongly about Sylvie that he thinks that's the way the father should be. This is what a dad kind of should do.
Cool.
It's to me, the romance was always sort of secondary in the book too. Like, I never thought of it. When I think back on reading it now, I don't think of it as sort of a romance, even though there was that element in it. And I don't know if that was your experience writing it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing that, like, in The Fault in Our Stars, that's clearly the very defined
Yeah.
parameter of the novel. And to me, it's really his story, and so, like, that was part of it, is that there's no chapters from Sylvie's perspective, and I think that really would have taken away from it.
Yeah.
So I like that it was all him the
I
whole
agree.
time.
Yeah, I didn't think of it, I mean, the romance angle kind of grew, but as I said, I think of it more as a coming of age novel, and I think that for me, at the end, whether he's right or whether he's wrong, when Richie gives away his days that he's won, and he gives them back to Sylvie, he thinks he's doing that anyway. That's the moment when I think, you know, okay, he started out in this book as a boy and he ends up a man. I mean, he does, he's thinking, by the end he's thinking of all the people around him, not just himself anymore. And that's, even in the beginning part I read, you know, they're just fooling around and they're joking, but by the end he starts to notice that the harpy's a human being. He finds out all the stuff he didn't know about her and why she's there in the hospital, and he finds out about, you know, a little bit of the backstory for the nurses. He realizes he's really been a jerk in some ways. He's getting those nurses in huge trouble by sneaking out and doing all the stuff he's not supposed to do. And I think for me that it's a growing up story, and the romance is part of that, but it's just part of it. He starts to try to think about how he could help his mom after he's gone. You know what I mean? He's really beginning to see beyond himself.